My name is Madison Carter and I'm 33 years old. On my very own birthday, right in front of all my relatives, my mother suddenly stood up, slapped me hard across the face and screamed, "You don't deserve to be my daughter." The whole room went silent, broken only by the sound of forks and knives dropping on the table. In that moment, I knew the family bond one had tried so desperately to hold together had shattered beyond repair. But what hurt me even more than that slap was the look in my brother Ethan's eyes. The same brother who once promised he would always protect me, now lowering his head in silence as if agreeing with my mother. When did the brother who used to hold my hand while crossing the street, who split a sandwich with me when we were kids, turn into someone who could betray me so cruelly? Have you ever been betrayed by the very person you trusted most? That feeling is like the whole world collapsing under your feet. If you've ever experienced it, you'll understand the pain I'm sharing. Please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because my story isn't just about personal wounds, but a journey to reclaim my worth and my dignity. And I believe somewhere in this story you might see a part of yourself too. Because what happened after that slap was even more brutal, and it all began with my brother. My childhood wasn't the peaceful picture people on the outside imagined. They often praised me as the good daughter, well-behaved, smart, obedient, the pride of my mother. But few knew that behind all those certificates covering the wall, I lived in a house filled with sighs, critical stares, and arguments that still make me shiver when I think about them. I was born in the suburbs of Boston in a middle-class family. My father was a construction engineer, often away at job sites. My mother was an elementary school teacher, strict and with very high expectations for her children. I had one older brother, Ethan, 2 years older than me. Unlike me, Ethan was carefree, distracted in school. My mother often sighed when looking at his report card, her gaze quickly turning to me, the daughter she believed could fulfill her dream of a successful, respectable family. From a very young age, I understood I wasn't allowed to make mistakes. I remember when I was 6 years old, I misspelled a word in a homework assignment. My mother didn't yell or hit me, but she took the paper, taped it right in the middle of the dining table, and left it there for the whole family to see for an entire week. Ethan gave me a pitying look, while I felt so ashamed I couldn't lift my head. I learned then that to be loved I had to be perfect. While I became my mother's life project, Ethan was treated like a burden. She would say right in front of him, "Madison is the real hope of this family. You only give me headaches." I knew it hurt him because afterward he would sneak up to the attic and shoot hoops alone until late at night. I wanted to comfort him, but back then I was just a child, not knowing how to pull him out of that heavy shadow. Ethan and I were very close. As kids, he was the one who walked me across streets, the shield whenever older kids tried to tease me. I remember once a classmate called me an ugly bookworm, and Ethan punched him in the face, getting suspended for a week. That night, when Mom unleashed all her anger on him, Ethan just smirked, leaned close to me and whispered, "Don't let anyone look down on you, Nat. I'm always here." I believed that promise like it was sealed in blood. But then my parents started falling apart. Their arguments often erupted at midnight when they thought we were asleep. I can still recall the sound of doors slamming, glass shattering on the kitchen floor, and my mother's muffled sobs. When I was 12 and Ethan was 14, they divorced. The house, already cold, became suffocating. After the divorce, my dad moved into a small apartment and rarely visited. He soon had a new girlfriend and his attention to us faded. My mom, who had been used to staying home, now had to work hard to provide for us. She became more irritable, stricter. And once again, I became her only hope. Meanwhile, Ethan spiraled. He neglected school, hung out with the wrong crowd. I remember one night while studying, I heard Mom screaming downstairs. When I ran down, she had ripped his backpack open, spilling out cigarettes and a few crumpled bills. She threw everything on the floor and yelled, "You're the older brother, you're supposed to set an example. If not, get out of this house." Ethan stayed silent, his eyes red, then stormed out for the night. I waited by the window, hugging my knees, crying until dawn. Through high school, our family felt like a ship with no rudder. Mom put all her energy into controlling me, sending me from one tutoring class to another. Ethan sank further into rebellion. I often slipped part of my lunch money into his hand, afraid he'd go hungry. Sometimes we sat on the bedroom floor, counting coins to buy milk and instant noodles. He whispered, "It's just us, Nat. No matter what happens, I've got you." I hugged him tight, believing sibling love was the only rope keeping us from being swept away by the storms at home. I studied relentlessly and got into Harvard Law, fueled by the hope that if I became successful, maybe Mom would suffer less, maybe our family would feel less broken. But when I told her I was accepted instead of joy, she sighed. "You're going that far, leaving me and your brother behind. What will become of this family?" I was stunned. The success I thought might mend our cracks became another fault in her eyes. During my Harvard years, Ethan fell further. He dropped out, worked odd jobs. I sent money home, whatever little I could earn from my library shifts, so Mom and Ethan could get by. But it never seemed enough. Neighbors told me Ethan spent time at bars, maybe even gambling. It broke my heart, but I felt powerless. One winter break, I came home to find Mom at the table, exhausted. Ethan sprawled on the sofa. Mom whispered, "He owes money again, Madison. This time it's a lot. Can you help?" Looking at my brother's gaunt face, the same boy who once shielded me on the playground, I felt my chest tighten. I nodded, emptying my savings for textbooks to pay his debt. Ethan only mouthed words without sound, not even a thank you. I told myself it didn't matter. As long as he got back on his feet, I'd sacrifice. But from then on, the distance between us grew. He began to treat my help as expected. So did Mom. I stubbornly believed that if I just worked harder, became more successful, they'd change. I didn't realize that by silently enduring, I allowed them to trample my love and efforts. Nights in my Harvard dorm, I tossed and turned, remembering Ethan's promise. "It's just us, Nat." I wondered if that bond still existed, or if it had eroded under Mom's harsh words, Ethan's resentment, and my own endless sacrifices. I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that no matter how tired, I kept going, studying, working, sending money. Because deep inside, the image of that boy holding my hand across the street still lived, and I wanted to believe I'd see that brother again someday. My father's death came like a storm, sweeping away what little fragile hope I clung to. It was a chilly autumn day in Boston. I was in the library prepping for midterms when my phone rang. A neighbor's voice, "Madison, you need to come home right away. Your father, he collapsed." I froze. The world around me went silent. I rushed home in a haze. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. The doctor said it was a stroke on his way back from work. I still remember the white sheet covering his face, his cold hand in mine as I clung on like a desperate child. That loss ripped my heart open, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. At the funeral, silence hung heavy. Ethan stood beside me, pale, eyes bloodshot but dry. Mom sat still as stone, lips pressed tight. Amid the organ music, I heard her whisper, quiet but clear enough. "If you hadn't gone so far away, if you'd stayed to help, maybe your father wouldn't have had to work himself to death." I stared at her, stunned. How could she lay that blame on me at such a moment? After Dad died, financial burdens crushed Mom. He left little behind except debt from building the new house. Instead of finding ways to cope, she turned her frustration on me. "Madison, if you worked closer to home and contributed, we wouldn't be in this mess." I swallowed hard. I'd been sending money for years, but to her it was never enough. Ethan declined faster. He abandoned school altogether, drifted with bad company. Once I found him in the garage, beer bottles scattered, his eyes vacant. I sat beside him, hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay, Ethan?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Okay? We just lost Dad. Mom's on my case every day, and you're the Harvard star lawyer. What am I? A failure." I squeezed his shoulder. "You're not a failure. You were the one who protected me, the one I looked up to. I believe you can start again." His gaze was lost. "You're naive, Nat. Some cracks never mend. Just like this family." His words cut deep. The brother I once clung to seemed to be fading into smoke and alcohol. Mom grew harsher. She openly compared, "Ethan's messed up because of you. You're too perfect, you make him feel small." Do you think I need another successful child? What good is your law degree to this family? I need money, not Harvard's name. I stayed silent. Nothing I said could matter. One winter night, I came home with frozen hands. The house was quiet, TV murmuring. Mom sat staring at unpaid bills. Ethan stumbled in from the back, reeking of alcohol. Mom yelled, "Drinking again? Do you know how hard your sister and I work?" Ethan snarled, "Enough, Mom. I'm not a machine." I tried to calm them. "I'll send more money. Please don't fight." Mom turned her icy glare on me. "See? You keep bailing him out. You're making him worse." Her words stabbed me. If I helped, Ethan sank deeper. If I stopped, he might collapse. I worked more jobs, even sold Dad's old car to send money. But one day I discovered the truth. The money wasn't for bills. Most of it went to cover Ethan's gambling debts. That night I called Mom, my voice trembling. "Why did you let him use my money to gamble?" She sighed. "You don't understand, Madison. He's your brother. He's weak, he needs me. If I don't protect him, who will? He have a future. He doesn't." I choked. "But is that fair? I work myself raw, sacrifice everything only to watch him sink deeper, and you keep blaming me." After a pause, she answered coldly, "Life isn't fair, Madison. You were born strong. You can handle it. Ethan can't. You're the one who has to carry this family." My hands shook as I hung up. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just betrayed, I was treated as nothing more than a tool. In her eyes, I wasn't a daughter. I was a resource to rescue a son she refused to let go. That night, I sat by the dorm window, snow falling heavy outside. I thought of Dad's warm smile, his words, "Live as yourself, don't let anyone decide your life for you." But he was gone, and I was trapped in my mother's warped love and my brother's fading shadow. I still tried to reach Ethan. Once I asked him at a cafe by the station, "Do you want to get out of this life?" He smirked. "You think it's that easy? You got school, friends, a future. I've got nothing. I'm just your shadow, Nat." I gripped his hand. "You're not a shadow. You're my brother. I believed your promise. We only have each other. Do you remember?" After a long silence, he pulled his hand away. "I remember. But promises are for kids. Grown-ups live in reality." My heart dropped. The boy who once vowed to protect me now felt like a stranger. After Dad's death, everything unraveled. Mom became a cold stranger, Ethan a reckless rebel, and me, no matter how hard I tried, I was left feeling utterly alone. I studied, worked, sent money, endured blame. But deep inside, I knew. The family I once thought was my anchor was now just a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The years that followed felt like walking barefoot on gravel. While friends partied or fell in love, I buried myself in case studies and long shifts at the library. Sometimes I thought of Ethan's sad eyes that day in the cafe. But calls with him were short, evasive. Mom still reminded me, "Don't forget to send money, Madison. There's always more to pay." Finally, I graduated from Harvard with honors. It should have been my proudest moment. But when I looked into the crowd, I didn't see Mom or Ethan. They hadn't come. While classmates embraced their families, I stood alone. I forced a smile, but inside I felt only emptiness. I started working at a big law firm in Manhattan. In the beginning, I often stayed until 2 or 3 in the morning, buried under stacks of thick case files. I accepted it all because I knew I needed to prove myself. And I did. Within just 3 years, I was entrusted with major cases, and the name Madison Carter began to circulate in the legal world. When I received my first sizable paycheck, I didn't think about shopping for myself. Instead, I sent money home. I thought my mother would be happy, but over the phone she only said, "Why so little? You work in Manhattan, don't you?" I bit my lip and stayed silent. To her, I would never be enough. At the time, Ethan was working at a repair shop, but I knew he wouldn't last long. One night I called home and his voice was slurred with alcohol. "Nat, you're really successful. And me? I'm nothing. Mom always talks about you. Do you know how small that makes me feel?" My throat tightened. "You're not small. I still need you." But he scoffed. Need me for what? To compare. Then he hung up. I kept pouring myself into work. One spring day, I was nominated to become the youngest partner in the firm's history. A dream for so many lawyers. I wanted to share this joy with Mom and Ethan. I called home, my voice bright. Mom, I'm about to be promoted. What I got back was a sigh. What good is a promotion for me? Ethan's the one who needs help. Take care of him. My heart sank. Why, in every story, did she only see me as a wallet? A week later, disaster struck. A major case I was handling suddenly had confidential information leaked to the opposing side. The firm was in chaos and my reputation was under fire. I was stunned. 4 nights, I stayed awake combing through every document, every possible suspect. Then I found the clue. Strange emails traced back to my old laptop at home, the one Ethan sometimes borrowed. I didn't want to believe it, but all the evidence pointed to him. I flew back to Boston immediately and found him at his small apartment. He opened the door looking gaunt, the smell of cigarettes clinging to him. I held up the printed emails in front of him. Explain this. This is your account, isn't it? Why were my case files leaked from that computer? He stayed silent for a moment, then slumped into a chair, giving a hollow laugh. They paid me. A lot, Nat. Thought, with the money I could ease the burden on Mom. You're already so successful you wouldn't lose anything. I froze, my hands trembling. You sold me out, Ethan? I'm your sister. The one who shared coins with you to buy milk, who stayed up nights waiting for you to come home. How could you? Ethan didn't look at me. He muttered, I was tired of being compared my whole life. I just wanted for once to prove I could do something too. His words stabbed like a knife. I felt both devastated and furious. But what broke me completely was when I went to my mother for comfort. After I explained, instead of being shocked, she snapped, He's your brother. He only did it because he was desperate. Don't be selfish. You have a career and he has nothing. Let him take a little to survive. I choked. Do you realize my career is on the line? Years of work could vanish because of this betrayal. Why can't you stand by me just once? Her eyes were cold. Because you're strong, Madison. You can handle it. Ethan can't. This family needs you to sacrifice. I broke down in tears, the kind that left no sound. It felt like the whole world had turned its back on me. My brother, once my protector, now my betrayer. My mother, once my comfort, now his shield. I walked out of that house, my chest heavy as stone. In the days that followed, I faced my firm, enduring questions and doubt. I fought to prove my innocence, showing evidence that the leak came from my brother's device. The board was silent for a long time, then finally accepted my explanation. But I knew the trust one once had was gone forever. Those nights in my Manhattan apartment, staring at the glowing city, I felt empty. I remembered Ethan's childhood eyes, his words, It's just us, Nat. That promise was now shattered by his own hand. And my mother, instead of comfort, had pushed me deeper into despair. I began to feel like a stranger in my own family. The higher I climbed in my career, the more my own blood treated me as a thorn. I wondered if I'd ever be able to trust them again. Inside me, a hollow kept growing, one no achievement could fill. And I knew my life had just turned onto a road from which there was no return. After that ordeal, I forced myself to keep working. I told myself it was over, that Ethan would stop, that Mom would realize her mistake. But reality was harsher. I was on the verge of becoming partner. Everyone at the office looked at me with both respect and suspicion. In that tense atmosphere, I poured everything into proving myself. Then one early summer morning, as soon as I stepped into the office, HR called me into a private room. On the desk was a thick stack of documents, confidential files from my case, printed in red headlines already published in the press with a note, internal source. I was stunned. This time it wasn't just suspicion. It was a public scandal. Every eye turned toward me again. I tried to stay calm, began digging for answers. What I found left me trembling. It wasn't only Ethan. My mother was involved. She had forged my signature on an authorization form to withdraw money from my savings account back home. That money was traced to a man known in the tabloid world. The same man who had run the smear piece on me. I couldn't believe it. I called home right away. Mom, why did you do this? You took my money to pay someone to destroy me. Her voice wavered but stayed firm. Madison, you have to understand. Ethan is drowning in debt. This was the only way to get people to notice him, to give him another chance. You're strong. You'll survive. But he won't. I cried out. You call that giving him a chance? Me? What am I to you? A walking wallet? A puppet you can use? She stayed silent. Silence that hurt more than any accusation. That day I nearly collapsed. The firm held an emergency meeting to decide whether to keep me. I laid out all the evidence, bank transactions, forged papers, even admitting that my own family was behind it. The room fell silent. Some looked at me with pity, others with doubt. Afterward, I wandered Manhattan's streets alone, neon lights and honking horns blurring into tears. I thought back to when Ethan hugged me as a child and promised, "It's just us." Now he and Mom had left me standing alone against the world. A few days later, I met Ethan at a small diner we used to go to as kids. He was already there, an empty beer bottle in front of him. I sat across, looked straight into his eyes. Do you remember your promise? That we'd never abandon each other? He avoided my gaze, muttering, Nat, I didn't mean to. Mom said it was the only way. I just needed money to pay debts. They lured me in and I was weak. Weak. I laughed bitterly. You sold out your own sister. Do you realize if the firm fires me, my entire career is gone? Do you understand that? Ethan stayed quiet for a long time, then whispered, I'm sorry. But it was far too late. That night, I wrote in my journal, my tears smearing the ink. I wrote for myself and for anyone listening. Sometimes the ones who hurt us most aren't enemies out there, but the very people we love. If you've ever been betrayed by those closest to you, share your story in the comments. I believe no one deserves to carry that pain alone. And if you're hearing me now, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. But I couldn't collapse. A part of me still wanted to fight, not just for myself but to prove I wouldn't be erased by betrayal. I began collecting documents, bank receipts, messages, emails. I knew that one day when the truth came out, I would be the one to bring it forward. Not for revenge, but for justice. In the middle of my struggle, Ethan came to me. He stood at my apartment door, ragged, eyes bloodshot. He said, Nat, I've lost everything. My friends left, the debts are piling up. Mom cries every day, blames me. I don't know what to do anymore. I looked at him, torn apart inside. Despite the anger, despite the wounds, he was still the brother I once loved. I whispered, You have to save yourself, Ethan. I've saved you too many times. Now you have to stand up. If not, you'll drag us all down. He buried his face in his hands, sobbing like a child. I turned away because if I looked longer, I might break again. That night, I sat alone, the streetlights spilling through the window. I asked myself, what is family if not the place you can always return to? But for me, family was the place that tore me apart most. I both loved and hated them. I wanted to hold on and I wanted to let go. And in that storm of feelings, I realized the road ahead couldn't stay the same. If I kept letting them control me, if I kept letting blood ties blind me, I'd drown forever. I had to choose, a painful choice but one necessary for survival. I closed my journal and sighed. That night, I knew my life was about to turn a page filled with storms, but also one where I'd finally find myself again. I thought after everything, Mom would regret it and Ethan would finally stop. But reality was harsher. The more I tried to stay clear-headed, the more I felt every family tie tightening around me, not to lift me but to choke me. One weekend afternoon, I decided to go back to Boston. I carried all the evidence I'd gathered, bank statements, forged authorizations, emails showing clearly that Mom and Ethan were behind the events that nearly destroyed my career. I wanted to face them, to hear their explanation, and deep down I still hoped for an apology, a flicker of remorse. When I walked into the old house, the smell of food drifted through, but it no longer felt warm. Mom sat at the dining table, her eyes cold. Ethan leaned back in a chair, looking exhausted, his eyes bloodshot. I placed the documents on the table, my voice trembling but firm. Mom, Ethan, this is what I found. You forged my signature to take money. You leaked my case files. I want to hear the truth. Why did you do this to your own daughter, your own sister? Mom hesitated, then smirked. You act like a victim. You have everything, career, money, status. Ethan has nothing. Do you think I could just sit and watch him be crushed? I did it all to save your brother. I was speechless. My voice cracked. Save him by destroying me? I'm your blood too. How could you sacrifice me to protect mistake after mistake? Ethan slammed the table. Enough, Nat. You always think you're right, that you're the victim. Do you know what it's like to be looked down on by the whole world? Do you know what it's like to live under someone else's shadow? Tears blurred my eyes. You once promised to protect me. You were the only one there for me when Mom and Dad fought, when I was scared. How could you be the first to betray me now? He gave a bitter laugh. That was then. Now you're above me, ahead of me, looking down at me like I'm a failure. I'm tired of it. I shook. You're wrong. I never saw you as a failure. You're my brother and I always wanted to lean on you. But you pushed me away. You chose betrayal. Mom shot up, pointing at me. Enough, Madison. You act so innocent. You're just selfish. You're afraid of losing your reputation, your career. Have you ever thought about this family? Have you ever put your brother above yourself? I sobbed. I've done that my whole life. I skipped meals to give him money, stayed up all night working to send money home, gave up my own happiness to make you proud. And what did I get? Doubt. Betrayal. How much more must I give before you stop treating me like a tool? The air was suffocating, heavy enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. Ethan looked at me, his eyes flickering with something like hesitation, but then he turned away, mumbling, You're too strong, Nat. You can handle everything. I can't. Mom's right. I collapsed into a chair, every breath squeezed out of me. In that moment I understood. I no longer had a place in this family. The mother who once held me through fevers now saw me as a wallet. The brother who once held my hand across the street now saw me as an enemy to defeat. I stood, looked straight at them, and said with a calm I didn't recognize, If love in this family only exists when I sacrifice everything, then that's not love. I've done all I could. From now on, I will no longer be your tool. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop her. I don't need to hear another word. I will live my own life. If you and Ethan want to keep living this way, then go ahead. But I will no longer be part of that cycle. I turned away, feeling the weight of their eyes on my back, but I didn't look back. Outside, the Boston sky was gray, the wind cut cold against my skin, yet I felt lighter than ever. Lighter because I had finally dared to say what I had buried for so long, even if the cost was losing the illusion of family. That night, I sat on the train back to New York, my mind in turmoil. I thought about my childhood, about Ethan sharing half a loaf of bread with me, about my father's smile as he watched us play. Now all of it was only memory. I asked myself if family still meant anything when the people you love most are the very ones who drag you into despair. I didn't have the answer. But I knew that today's confrontation ended a chapter of my life. I was no longer the girl who sacrificed everything for others. I had lost my family, but perhaps I had just found myself. I thought that after that showdown, I would never again see my brother in such a disgraceful place. But life has its own cruel cycles. Just a few months later, as I was beginning to regain my footing in Manhattan, a phone call from Boston dragged me into another storm. It was a police officer I knew, someone who had once worked with my firm. His words were brief. Madison, Ethan has been arrested. Financial fraud, signs of embezzlement. You may be appointed as public defender for his case. Prepare yourself. I went numb, collapsing into my chair. I didn't know if I was shaking from anger, pity, or fear. The brother who once promised to be my anchor was now on the other side, sitting in the defendant's chair. And the cruelest part? I was assigned to defend him. On the first day in court, I walked down the long hallway, my heels echoing against the cold stone floor. I saw Ethan sitting at the defendant's bench. He looked gaunt, eyes hollow, his shirt wrinkled. When our eyes met, he immediately looked down. My heart clenched, but I kept walking, my face composed. I couldn't let anyone see me falter. In the courtroom, the prosecutor read the indictment. The defendant, Ethan Carter, is charged with financial fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of assets, including those belonging to family members. I saw my mother in the audience, clutching her purse, her face pale. When the prosecutor mentioned family members, she flinched but never looked at me. When it was my turn, I stood, drawing in a deep breath. My voice rang firm, though my heart ached. Your Honor, as the court-appointed attorney, I will defend the defendant's legal rights. But I am also his sister who has witnessed his life from childhood until now. I know his weakness, his mistakes, and the shadows that brought him here. I turned toward Ethan. For the first time in months, he lifted his head. His eyes were empty, but I caught a flicker of regret. I continued, I do not deny the evidence presented. But I must emphasize, Ethan Carter was not born a criminal. He is a man shaped by a broken family, by constant comparisons, by repeated failures. That doesn't erase the crime, but it shows us a human being who deserves a chance to start over. The air was heavy. I knew the prosecutor wouldn't let me weave family history into this trial, but I didn't care. I needed to say it, not just to defend him but to free myself. When questioning began, the prosecutor presented documents proving Ethan had forged multiple loan agreements, even one under my name for a large amount. I held that contract in my trembling hands. I turned to Ethan, my voice hoarse. Do you admit you forged my signature? The room fell silent. Ethan bit his lip, eyes red. Then he nodded. It felt like a knife pierced my chest. I inhaled sharply, then continued. I cannot deny the truth. But I ask the court to see the larger picture. This is a man who has fallen not from malice but from weakness. With the right guidance, I believe he can change. The trial stretched for days. I faced witness after witness, people Ethan had deceived. They were angry, hurt, and justified in their pain. I listened, caught between my role as defense attorney and as a grieving sister. Many times I could barely speak. One evening after court, I went to see my mother. She sat slumped on the couch, hands shaking around a teacup. I asked, Mom, do you still believe Ethan just needs protection to be okay? Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know anymore, Madison. I just know I can't lose another child. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream that she had lost me long ago through her coldness and favoritism. But looking at her aged face, I swallowed it back. On sentencing day, the courtroom was packed. The prosecutor recommended 10 years in prison. I pleaded for leniency, citing his cooperation and circumstances. Ethan stood, voice shaking. Your Honor, I admit all guilt. But there is one thing, I want to say my sister has no fault in this. I betrayed her, the only person who ever trusted me. Please acknowledge that Madison never colluded. Hearing those words, my chest tightened. I didn't know if it was true remorse or a final attempt to salvage dignity. But for that moment, I saw a shadow of the brother I once knew. The court sentenced Ethan to 6 years, thanks to his admission and cooperation. When the verdict was read, my mother burst into tears. Ethan turned to me, eyes blurred with tears, mouthing the words, I'm sorry. I didn't answer, just gave a faint nod. I knew things would never be the same. But at least the truth was finally spoken, and I no longer carried the weight of false blame. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the late afternoon sun stretched across the stone steps. I paused, breathing deeply. In that moment I realized, justice is not only for society, it is for our own hearts too. After sentencing, I thought things would settle. But it was only the beginning of another battle. A battle with my family, with wounds that never healed, and with my own choices for the road ahead. In the days that followed, local news covered the case heavily. Photos of me at the defense table facing my brother spread across online headlines. They called me the lawyer sister who defended her own brother. Some praised me, others criticized. Some said I was too forgiving, even weak for seeking leniency. Others believed I was right, that family bonds never truly break. I ignored it all. What haunted me was my mother's gaze. She rarely called. When I visited, she only said, "You did what had to be done." But I don't know if in the end we saved Ethan, or lost him. I sat for hours in the small kitchen where I grew up, staring at old dishes, listening to the ticking clock. I realized I was standing between two shores, a brother lost in failure and myself longing for freedom. One evening, I received an invitation to the annual New York Bar Association conference, an event I had dreamed of since Harvard. I knew I'd have to speak. It was my chance to tell the truth, not just for my profession but for my family's story. That night, I walked onto the stage in a simple black dress. The lights bore down, my heart pounding. Hundreds of serious faces of top attorneys watched me. I gripped the microphone, breathing deep. I stand here today not only as a lawyer but as a sister. I have endured the hardest trial of my life, defending a brother who betrayed me countless times. Some may ask why. Why not let him face the full weight of his sentence? I paused, then continued, because justice is more than a sentence. Justice is truth revealed and ensuring no one carries guilt that isn't theirs. I didn't save my brother. But I saved the truth, that I never colluded, and that he must face his own actions. The hall was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. My eyes stung, but my heart felt lighter. I had finally said what I needed. For the first time, I was no longer the shadow of my family. Afterward, a colleague shook my hand. "Madison, your speech was powerful. Many of us have faced tough choices, but few are brave enough to speak them aloud." I smiled faintly, knowing I had turned a page. The next day, I returned to my mother's house. This time, I refused to avoid the truth. She was sewing on her old chair. I spoke firmly. "Mom, I need to be clear. From now on, I won't let anyone use family weakness as chains to bind me. I love you, but I cannot live as Ethan's shadow anymore." She looked up, weary. "You blame me for favoritism. Maybe I was wrong. But are you sure you're doing this for freedom, or just to prove yourself?" I met her eyes. "I'm doing this to live true to myself. And to show you that a daughter's worth is not measured by how much she sacrifices for her brother." The room was heavy. I knew she wouldn't change overnight. But at least I had spoken. When Ethan was transferred to prison, I visited. We sat across a glass wall. His face was thin, his eyes tired. "Madison, I don't know if you still see me as your brother. But if I ever get out, I promise I won't ever cast you into darkness again." I was silent a moment, then said, "Don't promise me, Ethan. Promise yourself." As I left the visiting room, I felt like I had closed a scarred chapter. But at the same time, I opened another, the chapter of a woman willing to live her truth. And I want to say to anyone hearing this, sometimes standing for justice isn't about fighting enemies outside. Sometimes it's about facing your own family, breaking chains that have bound you too long. If this story touches you, please like, share, comment, and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. I still remember that morning in New York, when the first heavy rain of the season pounded against the office windows, glinting like shards of broken glass. I sat at my desk, staring at piles of files I had been working on for months. All of them tied to Ethan. Not only his legal crimes but documents showing how he manipulated, concealed, and even dragged the family into his downfall. What crushed me most was an old loan contract with my mother's signature. It was a predatory loan Ethan had forced her to sign, using her as collateral to cover his debts. My hands shook as I read that line, realizing she had once silently sacrificed, not because she believed in him, but because she had no choice but to shield the son she loved too much. I brought the contract to her. She was in her old armchair, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. I laid the papers on the table. "Mom, do you know what you signed?" She glanced at it, her face paling. "Where did you find this?" "In the court records." "Do you realize you made yourself responsible for his debts?" She was silent for a few seconds, then whispered, "I knew." But Ethan came crying. He said if he didn't get the money, the loan sharks would hurt him. How could I turn my back? I clenched my fists. But don't you see? You didn't save him. You only taught him he could keep failing without consequence. Her head dropped, hands trembling. I was afraid of losing him, Madison. I couldn't bear another child disappearing from my life. Her words crushed me. I understood her fear, but I also saw the truth. For years, her blind love for Ethan had become chains binding us all. Days later, I threw myself into work, but then a call from federal auditors shook me. They had uncovered evidence that Ethan once manipulated a major real estate project, and this time the trail led directly to accounts under my mother's name. I rushed to meet them, insisting my mother had no knowledge that she had been used. The lead investigator looked at me gravely. Carter, we understand your family situation. But you know the law doesn't distinguish between family and liability. Unless you can prove she is innocent, we must treat her as a suspect. I walked out of their office and it started raining again. I stood in the middle of the noisy street, cold rain running down my face, unable to tell what was rain and what were tears. I had defended Ethan, but now my mother herself was at risk of becoming the direct victim. That evening I went to see her again. The house was quiet, only the clock ticking. I sat beside her, my voice tight. Mom, they're investigating. They suspect you're involved too. She froze, then sighed and said softly, then let them investigate. I have nothing left to lose, dear. I gripped her hand. No, you still have me. You still have yourself. I won't let you be pulled into Ethan's mistakes anymore. Her eyes brightened for a moment as if there was a bit of relief. For the first time in years, I felt the distance between us shrink. But at the same time, I also understood. It was time to bring everything to light. Not just for Ethan, not just for Mom, but for me. I couldn't keep living with hidden secrets. A week later, I decided to hold a family meeting. I invited Mom, my aunt, a few close relatives, and my personal attorney. The living room was heavy, the tension so thick you could hear everyone's quick breaths. I stood up and set a stack of documents on the table. This is the truth we've been avoiding. Ethan didn't just make mistakes in business. He used Mom, left a series of debts in her name, and now the law has started paying attention. The room went silent. Mom bowed her head. My aunt exhaled. My God, I didn't think he had pressed her this far. I took a deep breath and looked around. We have two choices. Keep hiding and let everything fall on Mom, or face it and bring the whole truth to light. Mom looked up, her voice weak. If we tell everything, Ethan will have no way back. I looked straight at her. But if we stay silent, you'll be the one to carry it. Do you really want that? The room sank into silence. I knew it was a point of no return. The next day, I proactively contacted the investigators and provided everything I had found. I made it clear. My mother was only a victim, while all the real decisions and signatures came from Ethan. As I signed the report, my hands trembled. I knew I was ending every chance for my brother. But at the same time, I also knew I was saving Mom and myself from a cycle with no way out. That night, I lay in bed, eyes wide open at the ceiling. Memories rushed in, from childhood days when Ethan held my hand walking me to school, to the times he screamed for money from Mom. I felt both pain and relief. Because in the end, I had done the right thing. The rain kept falling outside the window. I knew this storm hadn't ended. But at least I was ready to face it. No more avoiding, no more silence. I, Madison Turner, would be the one to put a period at the end of the days my family was bound in darkness. I still remember the moment I stepped out of the courthouse that day, the afternoon sunlight making me squint. No more rain, no more cold wind. That golden light seemed to remind me that after a long storm, finally a ray of light appears. Ethan had been officially convicted. His sentence was not only legal punishment, but also a wake-up call for my family. The years of covering up and turning a blind eye had finally come due. Mom sat next to me, her face gaunt but her eyes less tense. When the judge announced the sentence, I looked over and saw her gripping an old handkerchief in her hand, trembling as if she had just lost a piece of her own flesh, yet was also released. Ethan looked at Mom one last time before the officers led him away. His eyes were tired, with a trace of regret, a trace of blame, but more than anything, emptiness. I had hoped in that moment he would say something, an apology or a thank you, but no, he was silent. And I understood there are things he will never say for the rest of his life. We went home in silence. The car rolled past the familiar streets I'd known since childhood. Fall trees had begun to shed leaves, a golden blaze across the sky. Mom turned to me and whispered, "Madison, are you angry with me?" I took her hand, thin but warm. "No, Mom. I've never been angry with you. I'm only angry at the way we stayed silent for too long." Mom nodded slightly, eyes reddening, and we sat together, letting the silence soothe the wounds. In the days after the trial, the house once full of conflict became strangely quiet. No more urgent calls from the bank, no more nights of Ethan pounding on the door for money. Instead, Mom often went to the garden, diligently tending the rose beds she had neglected for years. I watched her find herself again, a woman who once had simple dreams, who loved peace, but was swept into the whirlpool by blind love for her son. As for me, I returned to work, but I was no longer the same person. I began attending forums on finance and family, sharing my story. I didn't use my full name, only telling it anonymously. Even so, many people came to me after the talks, holding my hand with tears welling up, saying they too had a brother, a sister, or even a child who had devastated the whole family. I realized my story was not alone. One time when I came home after a forum in Boston, Mom was waiting in the living room. On the table was a small envelope. She pushed it toward me, her eyes resolute. "These are the papers for the land in the suburbs. I've decided to transfer it to you." I was startled. "But Mom, that's the only place you have left. Why would you?" She shook her head. "I don't need to keep it anymore. I want you to use it for something meaningful, to rebuild from the ruins we've been through." I looked at the document in my hand, emotions welling up. I didn't want to turn it into my own asset. And then the idea came, I would create a fund to support families caught in the spiral of debt and financial manipulation by relatives. I named it the Turner Foundation. On opening day, the small downtown room was packed. Some women's hands still shook as they signed up for counseling. Some fathers awkwardly hid their tears while talking about sons addicted to gambling. I stood at the podium, my voice shaky but clear. "I'm not here to tell a pitiful story. I'm here to say we have the right to stop being silent. The right to put a period at the end of the vicious cycles in our families." Mom sat in the front row, quietly wiping her tears. I knew she was forgiving herself. From that day on, I felt my life had a new purpose. I was no longer just a daughter betrayed by her brother, no longer a woman living in shame. I was part of the journey to help other families escape tragedy. One late afternoon, while sorting old files, I happened to find a handwritten letter. Ethan's shaky handwriting. He wrote from prison, probably a few weeks after the trial. "Madison, I don't know where to begin. I know you hate me and maybe I'll never deserve forgiveness. But when I saw you standing in court, I realized one thing. I'm the one who destroyed this family, no one else. I hope that someday when you think of me, you'll remember the brother who held your hand across the schoolyard, not the criminal you had to accuse. Ethan." I sat silently for a long time, the letter blurred by tears. I didn't know whether I could fully forgive him. But at least I felt he had a moment of awakening. And perhaps that was the only thing I could still hope for in him. As time passed, the wounds in me slowly closed. Every morning, Mom and I drank tea on the porch, watching sunlight stream through the trees. Sometimes we recalled the past, but without bitterness. Only as lessons to remember that love cannot mean turning a blind eye, and that silence can be crueler than speaking plainly. I closed the journal I had written throughout that journey and took a deep breath. I knew life would bring many more storms. But this time I was ready, because strength lies not only in enduring the storm, but in knowing how to stand back up, rebuild the home that once collapsed, and cherish the light when it finds its way back. Every family has hidden corners outsiders can hardly understand. But for me, after losses, betrayal, and painful silence, I realized that sometimes what's needed isn't clinging or covering up, but daring to face things, to speak up, and to save yourself. Every wound leaves a scar, but it can also be a marker reminding us to be stronger, to value the true meaning of kinship and freedom. I believe anyone who hears this story will find a part of themselves. Perhaps the hurt, the anger, or even the hope that comes when you step out of the vicious circle. I truly want to hear your thoughts. If it were you, would you choose silence to keep a false peace, or stand up to protect yourself and reclaim justice for your family? Leave your thoughts below, because sometimes a small share can be a great encouragement to someone else. Don't forget to like, share this story, follow the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss other thoughtful stories about life and family.